Hey guys, Robbie here from CrossFit South Bend. Today we're going to try to answer the question, what is adrenal fatigue? This is something that a lot of people have maybe heard about. Maybe you've gone to an alternative health practitioner and you're really tired and they say, oh, you have adrenal fatigue. And today we're going to talk a little bit more about like what that actually is, what adrenal fatigue, that colloquial term, actually means. It's not actually a medical term, it's kind of a colloquial term for something a little bit more complicated than that. And we're going to talk about the different stages of adrenal fatigue and then what sort of things you could do to find out if you actually, in fact, have adrenal fatigue. So, first things first, the term adrenal fatigue, just like the term leaky gut, isn't really a medical term. Like if you try to go on PubMed.org and look up leaky gut, you're not going to find any results. But if you look up intestinal permeability, which is a legitimate researched condition that there are double-blind, placebo-controlled, peer-reviewed studies about, you'll find a lot more research. Similarly here, adrenal fatigue really refers to HPA axis dysfunction. HPA axis dysfunction really just means hypothalamus pituitary adrenal gland axis dysfunction. And what that means is that the hypothalamus, which is kind of the CEO of kind of the hormonal systems in your body, and the pituitary, which in a certain sense is the COO, the chief operating officer of the hormonal systems in your body, both of those, the CEO and the COO, are not communicating properly with your adrenal glands. And as a result, things have gotten out of whack. It could be because you're in a very, very stressful situation and the communication systems have gotten disrupted to the point where there isn't an appropriate feedback loop. Could be any one of a number of things. Typically what happens is that people get put under significant amounts of stress, whether it be from a new job or having a baby or getting divorced, or any one of a number of major life stressors, being in a car accident, having a major health issue go on. Any of those things, if left for long enough without sufficient time to recover or anything to help get you back to health, can lead to HPA axis dysfunction. So in this video, I'm just going to refer to it as adrenal fatigue. It's not really the proper term, but it's, it gets the point across. It's kind of a pain to say HPA axis dysfunction over and over again, so I'm just going to refer to adrenal fatigue, but just realize that when I refer to adrenal fatigue, that's actually what I'm referring to. And if you actually want to find out more about this online and kind of scientific literature, what you would want to look up is HPA axis dysfunction, not adrenal fatigue. So let's talk about the stages of HPA axis dysfunction. And really, this is kind of a useful tool to be aware of. This chart is a very useful way to kind of conceptualize things because it explains the way in which, if we have too much stress going on in our lives, that can lead to us getting to a point where we really need some extra help to kind of get back to a normal, healthy stress response. Many people feel like, especially those who have chronic health conditions, they're eating the right foods, they're exercising appropriately, they're sleeping the right amounts, and they're still not seeing what they need to see. And part of the reason why is because once you've crossed this threshold, which we'll talk about later, where you're kind of going down the other end of this curve, you can diet and exercise and sleep all you'd like, and those things are all helpful, but it's not enough to get you back to where you need to be. There need to be other measures in place to help you get back to where you need to be, and in a future video, we'll talk a little bit more about what those other measures might be. So first, let's talk about this kind of green shaded area right here. This is the area of optimum health. This is what's referred to as homeostasis. So when your body is adequately responding to the stressors that you're encountering in your daily life, and it's allowing you to function and not get sick or a major health condition or just feel tired all the time, you're in a state of homeostasis. This is what is normal for human beings, but not what's common these days. And there's a distinction to be made. What's common these days is people are stressed out of their minds, they drink coffee to get out of bed in the morning, they get that 2 p.m. slump. That's very common for people nowadays, but that's in no way, shape, or form normal. What's normal is for us to be in a state of homeostasis with the surrounding environment. We encounter some sort of stress, maybe it's a significant stress like a car crash or really intense workout, or some sort of let's say food poisoning or something like that, and our stress kind of goes up this curve, and then allowed enough time to rest, we kind of come back down and we're okay. So that's kind of optimum health. That's where we want to be. What we're going to talk about next is these different stages of dysfunction where you're not in this state of optimum health. Now, before I go on to these different stages, I should just mention what these axes here actually mean. Over here is the cortisol axis. So if we plotted your cortisol here, it would be pretty low. If we plotted your cortisol here, it would be pretty high. And right in this area, it's about normal. So you'll see for the acute stage, the cortisol is too high. For the exhaustion phase, the cortisol is too low. The axis down here is just sort of a time axis. If nothing is done to prevent cortisol from kind of going too far and getting too out of hand, these are the stages of progression of adrenal dysfunction. So hopefully that makes sense. Over here we've got the cortisol, over here we've got kind of time and the stages of progression that happen if nothing is done to correct it. So this is where everyone should be ideally, where you're feeling great, you recover from workouts, get out of bed in the morning, you don't crave food late at night, you're in optimum health. Stage 1 adrenal dysfunction, or stage 1 adrenal fatigue, or HPA axis dysfunction, is going to be the acute phase. Now in the acute phase, your cortisol is really, really high. Now again, this could be because you started your own business, or you had your first child, or you moved into your new home, or started a completely new job in a completely new part of the world. Any one of these things could be enough to get you into the acute phase, and the acute phase is really characteristic of this being perpetually a stress on your life that you can't, your body's trying to adapt to, but it can't. If you just had a short-term stressor like a stomach bug or something like that, it would be inconvenient and it wouldn't feel great, but you would recover from it, most likely. For most of us who are perpetually under these stressors for 6 months at a time or a year at a time with no ability to recover, you get kind of stuck in this stage 1 situation. Now, what's interesting about stage 1 is that this is where people feel really great in a lot of ways, even though it's not a stage of optimum health. Why do people feel great? Because it's kind of like they have a caffeine IV kind of dripping into their body. Cortisol, which is your master stress hormone, has very potent anti-pain effects. So it makes you feel like, wow, I can just take on the world. It makes you feel like you have a lot of energy because it regulates blood sugar. It's meant to kind of, get you ready to deal with a stress. And that can all be good in the short term, but in the long term, without any time to recover for this to go back to normal, things can be bad. So as you kind of see here, it's kind of like a roller coaster of sorts. You kind of start here and then you kind of get pulled up the ramp. And if the stress stops, then you kind of just get released right back down the ramp. But if the stress keeps going and going and going, there's a point of no return at which once you get to this kind of major stressful point, your body only has a finite ability to deal with stress. It can't infinitely deal with stress. If you don't allow it enough time to recover, if you keep getting more and more stressors, there's a certain time at which your body just won't be able to keep up in terms of its recovery capacity and cortisol production and all that stuff. And this inflection point right here, this point where things kind of turn, is the point where, it's different for different people. It's not always going to be the same, where your adrenal glands start to go haywire and not produce things the way they should. So when you're going down the back end of the acute phase, unless you do something to push yourself back up in the other direction, you're going to cascade down into these other 2 stages, which are really, really not good. So that's stage 1. The acute phase, you feel good, you got lots of energy, this is probably the time in your life where you feel like you could just handle anything. Maybe it's college where you're like, man, I got by on 4 hours a night of sleep, and I had all this homework, but and I went to the gym, but I made it all work. But you don't feel that way anymore. That's an example of stage 1. Let's talk about stage 2, the compensatory phase. Now, what's interesting about this, if you were to do a salivary cortisol test, which we'll talk about in a bit, or even a urine cortisol test, which would be typical if your doctor even considered the possibility of running this on you, your numbers in the stage 2 compensatory phase would be the exact same as in the optimum health phase. So to someone who's just looking at your total cortisol output, this would look the same as this, but the two could not be more different. In the green shaded area, you have no symptoms and you are a healthy individual who is able to respond to the stresses around you. Here, it might seem like your cortisol levels are normal because it coincides with that kind of normal area of the cortisol graph, but you don't feel healthy in any way, shape, or form. You start to have lots of symptoms, whether it's fatigue, digestive issues, skin issues, that 2 p.m. slump, can't recover properly from workouts. This is where people, have these symptoms and they start self-medicating. Oh, well, I'm taking, fish oil for my recovery capacity, and I'm taking melatonin to help me get to sleep, and I'm taking digestive enzymes to help me fix my digestion. And all of these things, they help a little bit here and there, but they're kind of like symptom whack-a-mole, right? One symptom comes up, I'm going to take something for this. Another symptom comes up, I'm going to take something for that. And unless you address the underlying cause of the situation, which is usually adrenal dysfunction, it can be other things as well, but adrenal dysfunction where your cortisol and your DHEA are out of balance, you're not really going to get to the root of the issue. So you're going to have to keep taking all these things, and that won't fix the underlying cause, and it might lead you to stage 3. So one of the reasons why we're big fans of salivary cortisol tests is because they show you the individual cortisol levels throughout different stages of the day. They don't just show you the total cortisol, which can be deceptive in making you think, oh, my total cortisol is fine, because it lines up with this area here, but you're having symptoms. A normal, functioning, healthy human being does not have symptoms, period. So if you're having symptoms, that's a sign that something is amiss somewhere. Could it be with the adrenal glands? Yes. Could it be with your detox systems? Yes. Could it be with your digestive system? Sure. It could be a lot of different things, but a normal, healthy human being does not have symptoms. And if you are having symptoms, that's a sign that something is not the way it should be. Okay. Let's talk about stage 3, the exhaustion phase. If things are led to sort of progress all the way down here, this is where you really get to the point where someone might have to seek medical attention, where if they haven't proactively tried to fix their situation and they just kind of let their stress get really bad, you get very serious symptoms. You get diagnosed autoimmune conditions, diagnosed digestive disorders like ulcerative colitis or Crohn's disease. You get serious degenerative diseases, serious inflammatory diseases, rheumatoid arthritis, all these different things, Parkinson's, multiple sclerosis, all these different things that are diseases of inflammation, which are significantly contributed to by an adrenal system that is out of whack, where your cortisol is not where it should be and your body can't properly respond to the stressors that it's that are in front of it on a daily basis. So here, things have gotten really, really, really bad, and you might need some medical intervention to kind of get things back up where they need to be, or this might be the time where someone seeks medical intervention. But as you can see, we've already progressed through these not great stages where something could have been done, but it was just kind of left to fester, and it led to this not good thing. This is typically where symptom-wise, people feel like, man, it's everything I can do to get out of bed in the morning. They pray for a snow day so that they don't have to go to work. They get that 2 p.m. slump all the time. All these different things. This is where people feel really, really not good. And one thing to bear in mind here is that there is no stage 4 adrenal fatigue. Stage 4 adrenal fatigue, if you could call it such a thing, is literally death. It's where your body cannot meet the demands of what's going on in your life anymore. It's where you literally just cease to produce any cortisol whatsoever, and your body systems just aren't functioning. So you don't want to get to that point, right? And that's a very rare and severe case, but it's worth bearing in mind that unless you are doing something to kind of push the ball back up the other direction, or get things back where they should be, things are going to keep cascading down the other side. Now, again, one way to think about this is kind of a financial analogy. So imagine someone comes to you and they say, oh, well, every month I spend within my means. I earn a certain amount, and I always, my expenses are such that I spend within my means. That's very good. That's a very good financial habit to have, right? And if you do that every month, chances are you're probably going to be in overall general financial health, kind of like this homeostasis phase. However, if you are in significant debt, like any one of these phases over here, or these stages over here, let's say you're $100,000 in debt, and you say, oh, but I'm spending within my means now to try to correct the $100,000 in debt. That's good that you're spending within your means, but that's not enough by itself to get rid of the $100,000 in debt. And it's the same thing here with cortisol. We love nutrition here. We've done many videos on it. We love exercise. We're a CrossFit gym. We think that sleeping adequate amounts, doing yoga and Tai Chi and meditation, all these things to reduce stress are incredibly important. But if you're $100,000 in health or stress debt, those things by themselves are not going to be enough, the diet, the exercise, the sleep, and meditation, to get back in the normal realm. Dr. Daniel Kalish, one of my favorite functional medicine practitioners, has a great saying that I really like. You can't just go into a cave and meditate and cure stage 3 adrenal dysfunction. And he's absolutely right. You need alternate measures. You need extra stuff to help you get back up this ramp so that you can get back to health. So while nutrition and exercise and sleep and stress reduction are all important, that's really the equivalent of spending within your means. And that's a great thing if you're not in financial debt or health debt, but if you are, other things need to be done. Okay, and we'll talk about those things in future videos. So what can you do to kind of find out whether this is something that's true of you or not? So one thing that we are very big fans of here is a salivary cortisol test. You could get something like this from BioHealth Laboratories, the 205 in particular. Other labs run it like Genova. We do strongly recommend you do this with a qualified practitioner, a functional diagnostic nutritionist, for example, or a functional medicine practitioner who can interpret your results and tell you the things you need to do to get back to health. But the salivary cortisol test is basically a test that you do 4 times throughout the day. Spit in these saliva vials, and it will tell you the amount of free cortisol you're producing at that specific time of day. And you can kind of see in the morning, is it really low? Maybe that's part of the reason why it's hard to get out of bed in the morning. Or at 2 p.m., it's really, really low, and that's why you get the 2 p.m. slump. And there are other things that can correlate with as well. Cortisol isn't just a correlate for energy. It explains a lot of other seemingly disparate symptoms that you might be dealing with. So that's definitely something to check out. All right, guys, so a little bit of an intro to adrenal fatigue. Hopefully you understand now that this is really just a colloquial term for HPA axis dysfunction. You understand the difference between kind of the 3 stages of HPA axis dysfunction. Why stage 1 can seem like you're the king of the world, you're on top of the world, but things are going wrong. Why stage 2 can seem like on a test you're fine, but you're really not fine because you have symptoms. And why stage 3 is really where you don't want to be because you're getting to a lot of really bad degenerative conditions and autoimmune conditions at that point, and why a salivary cortisol test might be worth taking to see where you are. All right, guys. Thanks so much for tuning in. Robbie here from CrossFit South Bend. We'll see you guys next time.